How you been?
I'm tired.
Yeah?
Yeah.
How come? Just a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes that you can talk about?
Well, I mean, a lot of it's right in front of the scenes
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
It's the joke I always make that I've probably made to you before is I don't know sometimes what we're doing until I read the patch notes.
Yeah.
Because so many things are happening on League of Legends all the time, and so there's just there's hey, what happened to Clash? There's oh my God, what do we do about Marksman? There's just 100 little fires to put out always.
Very good. Well, I'm joined right now by Greg Street, also known as Ghostcrawler, recently obtaining the Ghostcrawler Twitter account back once more. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah. So I've known obviously of the work that you've done all the way from back when you were on Blizzard and coming out there to sort of put up a fence on the forums for the people who were frustrated. But now you're over at Riot, and I know a lot. I think the only thing I know really about you is that you had like a marine biology degree and then somehow ended up in video game design. Am I correct on that?
That is correct. Yeah.
Yes. So just looking forward to getting to know more about you. What was your path into game design?
So yeah, I was an oceanographer. I have a PhD and everything. I was a real scientist for about 2 years, and I hated it. The story I like to tell is that in graduate school, I spent a lot of time out on boats and in the water and fishing and on the beach, and it was super cool. I was dirt poor, but it was a lot of fun. And then once I was a real scientist, I spent all of my time in front of a computer. Like I was writing grant proposals, and then, if you actually ever got money to do research, then you'd have to write up the papers. And I had graduate students that were, I guess, going out in the field that I never got to. I sat in a room with no windows looking at a computer screen, and I thought, this is miserable. And my colleagues who were really good at being scientists loved it. Like, that was enough to satisfy them. And I almost felt like a fraud that I didn't love it. And I felt like, I need to get out of this business because I don't love it enough, to be at the caliber of these people that just live for this stuff.
So now you make games for people who sit alone in a room looking at a computer screen all day.
I mean, I figured if I was going to be at a computer all day long, I might as well be playing games.
Were you playing games during all that, like in between, writing grant proposals? Were you sitting there playing games?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a gamer all my life from Atari 2600 and monochromatic PC games and arcades back in the day.
Yeah. So what happened for you between the time when you decided to switch off from, and also before we even get into that, what was that moment like? When did you throw away the PhD and like hop onto a game design situation?
I mean, it's just not a great job, and I really admire the people that can do it because you're fighting for funding. In this political climate, it must be awful trying to get funding for environmental science. There are very few job opportunities. There are probably 6 people in the world that understood what I was doing, so it's really hard to be like, yeah, I am an oceanographer, but I don't play with dolphins. Let me tell you about DNA and harpacticoid copepods and all this super esoteric stuff.
But what was the moment like where you switched from that to, because like you decide you want to get out of this,
yeah,
and then you have to transition over this thing that is jarringly different from what you're doing. How do you convince somebody to hire you? Did you start what was that path like for you?
I got super lucky. So at the time, this is 20 years ago.
Yeah.
A lot of games were made by a programmer who also did all of the art and design was barely a thing at the time. And games were just kind of discovering that they needed to specialize and have people that did the programming and people that did the art. And then also there were just people who would come up with the player experience. Like they would make the levels or they would design the units or whatever it was. And, I don't know how to code. I'm not a particularly talented artist. That was my avenue in, was to be a game designer. And so I reached out to a few companies who had, no interest. But there was this one company that I read an interview with their lead designer who said, yeah, we're always looking to hire people with no experience. I'm like, that's me, I have no experience.
What was that company?
Ensemble Studios, who made Age of Empires.
Age of Empires.
Yeah,
okay.
I loved Age of Empires. It's a historical RTS, and I'm a big history fan. So I love the fact that this game included really weird civilizations like the Hittites, which no one had heard of.
Right. So you ended up there. What was your first, what were you doing over there?
So they have, it's a multiplayer, single player game, and they needed someone to make the single player campaign. So basically tell a story, make these maps where you would be put in some type of remotely historical situation and, build up your army and attack the AI. They had no one to do that, and they were running out of time, and they're like, we need to get someone who can build all this stuff for us. So they said, have you ever made a scenario for Age of Empires? I'm like, oh yeah, sure. Never had. Went to the internet and researched like all the tricks, all the techniques. How do you do this? What do players like? Made my own AI script because I figured that would be impressive. Tried to wrap it in a historical wrapper, and they really liked the map. And they're like, this is good. And they actually shipped it even. They were so desperate for content.
And because this is at an interesting time because people are looking for, as you said, like people are just sort of figuring out like how to design stuff, how to make all this stuff work. What was that interview like? I mean, did you even mention like your previous work and?
Oh, they knew. That may have helped that I had like a PhD on my resume, because I'm sure they didn't get many of those. One of the guys I interviewed with, his name's Sandy Peterson, who has done a lot in the Call of Cthulhu world. He's also worked on games like Doom. And he studied arachnids in college. I studied crustaceans, so he immediately hit it off from a really geeky standpoint. And that may have helped me get my foot in the door, but it really was just, I talked to a few people on the phone, somehow impressed them. Again, I was super lucky. It wasn't that I stood head and shoulders above their, other candidates.
Do you think somebody could do that now? Could in this day and age with the game industry being what it is, could they come in and say like, I've got a PhD and I made this mod, hire me?
Yeah, absolutely. Riot is weird that way in that we really pride ourselves on hiring, we hire a lot of designers right out of college. We figured we've almost maxed out what we can do in like finding people at other companies who understand the way we think and know League of Legends. So a lot of what we do now is try to get designers kind of before other companies do by getting them young.
Yeah. Help me fill in the gap. So you worked on Age of Empires. What was everything else before? Like what was your path before you got to Blizzard and started? People really knew who you were.
Yes, I did Age of Empires for 10 years. I was the most junior designer you can imagine. I literally think my desk was a folding card table in the hallway. Made, a bunch of scenarios. I also made the random maps, which was super fun. Like we had randomly generated maps, kind of like a Civilization, even though it was a competitive multiplayer game. And gradually just worked my way up the ranks. I did a lot of the unit design and balance for Age of Kings, which was a super successful game. Worked on Age of Mythology and its expansions, Age of Empires 3 and its expansions. And then around that time, Ensemble was acquired by our publisher, which was Microsoft, which is super exciting at the time. After that, I started to realize, wow, Microsoft is really kind of starting to tell us a lot like what to do.
Yeah.
I was working on, we did a bunch of R&D games, and I was working on one I fell in love with, which we described it as like a space Diablo game at the time. There was nothing in that genre in a science fiction universe. It was a wonderful game. I'd still stake my career on it because it was such a great game. And Microsoft is like, yeah, we already have a science fiction game in development called Mass Effect, so we don't need 2 sci-fi games.
Yeah.
I'm like, what the hell? You have 2 racing games, but they didn't want 2 sci-fi games. Yeah. And I got really worried that like this is the future of the company. They're just going to want us to make Age of Empires 16 and 17. At the time, my friends would not shut up about this new game that came out called World of Warcraft. And it got to the point where I would not have dinner with them because I knew all they were going to do was talk about WoW. And they kept saying, oh, just try it. They finally got me to try it, and I'm like, okay, you're right, I get it. This game's amazing. I was soon main tanking for the like company guild, and I would send out emails every night about what we did and our accomplishments to the whole company, and nobody really cared. They're like, Street, stop spamming us with your exploits in Molten Core. I fell in love with the game enough that when I started to worry about the future of Ensemble, I just kind of cold called Rob Pardo at Blizzard, who I knew barely. And it just so happened, I didn't understand this till later, but the plan was that Jeff Kaplan was going to move off of WoW, go make a new game, and they needed, his lieutenant would then take his spot, and they needed a new backfill to work on class design. And so my timing, again, was just really good. And I went over to Blizzard, and within a year, Microsoft had shut Ensemble Studios down.
Yeah.
So it was really good timing.
Good timing.
Yeah, so much of this career is luck. You like to think that it's skill and that the really smart people get rewarded, but look, I'm living proof that you could be pretty incompetent and survive for a couple decades.
So you end up on WoW. What was it like? Because you had these friends who were like trying to convince you to play WoW.
Yeah.
They must have been laughing whenever you're like, okay, now I'm like one of the faces of the design team. For
Yeah,
this.
I like told them, I told them, hey, I'm going to Blizzard, and nobody was surprised, and no one was mad. They're like, of course, you love that game. And then I was still like playing with these same players, and they knew that I was working on the game. Like half the guild knew and half the guild didn't. So it was really, really funny when they would like complain about, something Ghostcrawler had said that day on the forums. Then here I am in their battle with them.
What was it like switching over to Blizzard? Because Blizzard, this legendary game company,
Yeah.
I'm sure a very different atmosphere than where you'd been before.
It was so different. At Ensemble, one of the things we did was iterate a ton. Like I would have an idea on the way into work, and then we'd get there and we'd try it out and play test it that day. And I knew Blizzard had this reputation of being really iterative, so I was expecting it to be pretty similar. But what they do is they think really, really deeply about a problem first. And it was really easy for them to shoot my stupid ideas down before we bothered implementing it, saving a ton of time. Okay. So by the time they get to the implementation stage, there's a pretty good chance the idea is good. And then they would just polish and polish and polish on it. It was just a really different environment than I was used to, and what I've tried to bring here as well.
And WoW for me, like, it's such a definitive game for my gaming life.
Yeah.
And it was very unique for its time, right? Like the first game that I can think of that did so many of these things that it accomplished. What was it like for you working on that project? Was there a lot of stress? So many people playing this game, right?
Yeah, it was a lot of stress, but you also feel, I don't know, the Kaplan always described it as an honor. Like, you get to work on a game that touches so many people's lives, and you feel, you're really grateful that you can do that. This is exactly the kind of experience I never had in science because I was touching nobody's life directly. Yeah. But here, you could make a change, and that afternoon, millions of people would be experiencing it. Or you could talk about something, and people will be hanging on your every word, not because they care about you, but because the game is so important to them.
One of the things that's interesting, I think, about folks at game companies is you go in conference rooms, you have these talks, you make the decision, it rolls out. You know that it's hitting a lot of people, but in a sense, like, you're so detached from like that person who is playing somewhere. Mm-hmm. Are there moments for you that you can remember, or maybe a single moment where you realize like sort of the effect that a game like WoW can have on a person, like maybe a story or a person that you met or anything like that?
There's a couple that stick in my mind. There was one, a father who talked to me at an event somewhere, and he said he had a teenage son that they were pretty estranged, and they barely spoke. But the son was really into WoW, so the dad decided to pick up WoW. And they would talk to each other in the game, in chat or whatever, where they'd never talk in real life. And then it kind of got beyond the point of just talking about the game to like, oh, how was school today? And the kid would open up within WoW, which he couldn't do just over the dinner table. And I know that's kind of a sappy story, but it really kind of struck me that like they never would have improved their relationship without the game being there.
Yeah.
And there's so many stories of like, oh, I met my spouse on WoW, I met my best friend on WoW. I still have friends, on Facebook or whatever that I only really know from the game. And I have friends, like so many people these days, that I don't know what they look like or even who they are, where they live, but we're still friends in this weird way. Yeah.
So all these people having these wonderful emotional moments, and then immediately going to the forums and complaining when you nerf their class. So I mean, when did you start to become like the face for all this? Because I'm thinking back, like I remember seeing the crab show up on the forums and those kind of moments. But was there like a conversation around it where it was like, we need someone to tank all this hate, or was it more subtle than that?
It was, so at the time, they've improved a lot. I don't want to give Blizzard shit because they've gotten so much better at it. But at the time, they had no, the communication from Blizzard was, well, you'll read the patch notes and then you'll know what we think. And they barely like went to conventions at the time. They wouldn't talk to players. There was very little. In fact, they kind of viewed it as a distraction. And there was a little
because they were busy, right? Like
they were busy. And they would assume that like, oh, if you're spending time on the forums, you're not spending time working, and maybe that's just a vocal minority or whatever. And again, they've improved a lot since then. So I had to ask Kaplan and Chilton, who were my bosses, like, hey, can I get a blue name to post to the forum? Because they didn't just hand those out. You had to be pretty important in the company to get one. And I remember Kaplan just kind of like looked at Chilton and kind of shrugged, like, yeah, let's give it a shot. And within a few days, they were like talking about the number of blue posts had just gone up by an order of magnitude, and Kaplan's just like, oh, that's Greg. Like it was all me just out there talking. And they really didn't know how to handle it. Like I think the design team and the WoW team in general were always okay with it. The community team like didn't quite know what to do with it because I was so prolific with just answering questions, talking to players, basically saying anything that wasn't outright, leaking secrets or making commitments we couldn't keep. And they struggled a lot with, do we like this? Is this okay? I was really pushing at walls they weren't super comfortable with at the time. A couple different times they shut off forum access. They're just like, we don't want devs on the forums anymore. It's too much of a risk. And I think, I know a couple of those times my reputation really took a hit with players because all of a sudden I stopped talking and they thought they had chased me away or something like that, not knowing that kind of company policy had changed, and I couldn't really throw the company under the bus, although I guess I'm doing it right now.
But I mean, it is a different time because I think now game companies are starting to realize the value of having people out there. But at that time, communication was always in game companies, I know from just talking to people, it goes through all these channels, right? There's an approval process for almost anything that goes out, and the community team are professionals that know exactly how to talk to the community, or should at least. And so I assume it must have been kind of this weird thing where you're almost like this rising celebrity, and they're like, how much do we want to let this guy go out there and speak for the company versus how much is he speaking on his behalf? I assume that must have been kind of difficult for them and for you to sort of navigate.
Oh, it totally was. And it was one of the things I really love about Riot is that we have so many voices out there that players don't just... I had the opposite problem at Blizzard where it was just me. And I was not in charge of the WoW development team. I was looking at a pretty small part of the game, but all the blame and all the credit for anything landed on my shoes, which felt really weird because it was a team of a couple hundred people all working on the game, but it was all just Ghostcrawler, which made me uncomfortable. And like I said, I like that now, even though, whatever, everything that's wrong in League is my fault, but there's a lot of other writers out there. So the players kind of know that different people work on different parts of the game and no one person kind of designs it all on their own.
I mean, people know certainly T is the guy ruining all his champions or making overpowered champions. So at least there's some. Why do this in the first place, right? Because you're wading into. I remember those forums; they were filled with trolls and angry people and people memeing. Why wade into the masses when this isn't in your job description, and potentially seems like it created sometimes maybe conflicts within the company?
I mean, there were two reasons. The first one was I remembered what it was like being on the other side, and I don't understand what the developers are thinking. Should I abandon my warrior because now paladins are better tanks? I don't know if Blizzard intended for paladins to be better tanks or if they're going to fix it soon. And particularly on an MMO, you make such an investment in that character that you just want to know what they're thinking. If they say, look, this isn't the intention and we'll fix it eventually, that gives you hope. Yeah. And so I wanted to give hope to players who just didn't know what our goals were. But also just selfishly, it was a really easy way to validate your ideas or just to I remember it was on Age of Empires when we were arguing about, hey, is this civilization, too powerful or whatever? And I said, well, why don't we just ask? Why don't we just go on the forums and say, hey, what do you guys think? And that was such a random thought at the time. There was a lot of fear that, we'll let our guard down. They'll realize that we really don't know what we're doing if we ask for help. We have to be on high saying we know all and you're down in the masses. And I hated that attitude of we're somehow smarter or better or special than you. I wanted to just be, look, we're just like you. We love games. We want to make this game better. Help us do that.
Yeah. Was there any point in time where you wanted to take a step away from the forums because people were just too intense? I mean, the hate threads that people can get when they put themselves out on the internet, and especially when you're making changes, somebody might be spending 40 hours a week plus playing their rogue, and now they feel like you've ruined that character. Even if it wasn't your decision, you've become the avatar for this. They go on the forums and just immediately spew stuff. That must be overwhelming at some points in time.
Earlier on, when I was less experienced at this, players could get to me. They would say something, they would find the right way to be hateful, and I would take it hard. That doesn't happen anymore. It's going to be virtually impossible at this point for someone to get me riled up on that. But I still felt shutting off the conversation is the wrong answer. At that point, I had made my bed. Like, I had opened up this channel, and I needed to still keep the communication lines open, or I was just, it's really cruel to like tempt players into this conversation and then shut it off just because it started to be uncomfortable for me.
Sure.
And I say this with a grain of salt because I feel like I'm inviting something here. Despite all of this, I have never been targeted the way so many people get targeted on the internet these days. Like, there's a couple of stupid death threats and stuff like that I didn't take super seriously, but for the most part, as angry as players got, they've never really tried to take it out on me more than just internet insults.
Yeah.
And I'm very grateful for that. I'm not issuing a challenge to anyone, please.
Years ago, I was visiting the Riot campus, and I saw you walking around with one of the producers or somebody, I forget who, and I was like, oh, that's so funny, Ghostcrawler is walking around Riot. And then within a couple of days, it got announced that you were leaving Blizzard and joining Riot, and I thought that was really funny. I was like, oh, wow, I saw that. And that was such an interesting moment for me because you had built such a persona for yourself at Blizzard, and I identified you as being this Blizzard guy, and to come to Riot, which both great companies, but like has a very different feel, and like I know the names over here. It felt crazy.
Yeah.
All of what I described must have been very small and minor compared to sort of like the decisions that you had to go through and the experience you had in trying and deciding whether or not you were going to do this and why to do it and all that stuff. So what was really behind that whole move?
So there's a couple things. One was I had been doing World of Warcraft for 6 years, and that is a game that never ends. Like, it was always going to be next expansion, what do we do? And then at the time, the kind of company decision was we have to really minimize the change we make because it's making it harder for people to come back to the game. We're really worried about returning players and then being able to keep up with all the class changes. And I understood that as a business decision. I didn't agree with it, but I didn't question it as a sane decision. But it just wasn't very fun for me as a developer because it was going to mean all these problems with the classes that I'd wanted to fix for years were going to be really hard to fix in this environment because I'd be in a mother may I situation for everything we wanted to do. So I was like starting already to think about what should I do next? Is it at Blizzard? Is it somewhere else? I wasn't really looking to leave. I mean, it's a great place. And even to this day, I would recommend anyone. Blizzard's a great place to work. I love that company. The other thing that happened is at some point, Blizzard started sending me to China as like their China envoy. And once I went a couple times, they kept asking me to come back. So I was at China Joy, which is, have you ever been to a China
I've never
Joy?
been, but
It's
I'm familiar, yeah.
Gargantuan. It's like 5 E3 stuck together in the middle of Shanghai in like July, so it's super hot and super humid.
Yeah.
And 100,000 Chinese gamers in these convention halls. And I was at the WoW booth on stage, like answering questions, which is super cool. We had a huge audience, and by huge I mean there's probably 300 people in the audience. And I look across the hall, and there's a booth, and I swear it must have been like 5,000 people at this booth. And I'm like, what is that game? And someone said, oh, that's League of Legends. I'm like, with a Dota clone? Like, people still play that? And I had played League when it came out and kind of drifted off and wasn't paying a ton of attention to it anymore, and it had exploded. And I'm like, okay, they're doing something right. This is not, yes, there's a lot of luck in this industry, but there's something special here. I need to understand what that is. And I had met Tom Cadwell, who's my boss, at a party or something at some point. So I knew him a little bit. And I even remember because we were sitting there drinking beers and he's like asking me questions about hunter mechanics. And I'm like, I think he's kind of interviewing me. This is super awkward. But anyway, I just kind of cold called Tom and I said, look, I'm really happy at Blizzard. I do not want to waste your time, but I want to understand what are you guys doing at Riot that's so special? Like, why do you have so many players? Why do people love this game so much? And so that led to a few dinners and casual conversations. And again, at that time, I wasn't really thinking I'm going to leave. But the magic that happened, and I think we still do a pretty good job of that today when we interview people, is I was super impressed by the people I talked to. I'm like, wow, they really have a plan and a philosophy, and they really know what they want this company to be. Everything down to like the way they treated players is like, hey, the developers aren't the VIPs here, the players are the VIPs. I love that attitude. Where at Blizzard, kind of we're the rock stars getting up on stage at BlizzCon and to,
literally be a rock star.
Yeah, fog and fireworks going off and stuff like that. And so the more I talk to the people at Riot, the more I'm like, oh my God, there's something special here. And I met Mark and Brandon. I was super impressed by just the way they thought about the company, the way they thought, the kind of people they wanted to attract. And they really had a vision for like, yeah, we have one game. Spoiler, we still have one game.
Yeah.
But they had a vision of where they wanted the company to go. And I was like, I have to be a part of this. You know, they sold me on it. And I miss Blizzard, I miss WoW, I miss my friends there terribly, but for me, this was really the right decision. I love this company. Was
it hard telling, because over 6 years, you must have built a lot of relationships at Blizzard, and Blizzard, from the way I talked to the guys over there, it definitely feels like they're a bit of a family, and you had to say like, I'm moving from Irvine to LA.
It was basically to the enemy.
Yeah. And so I imagine that must have been difficult for you to sort of navigate.
Oh, it was really hard. You know, they felt betrayed, I think. And to this day, even though I was nervous about asking for my Twitter handler back, to this day, they're super cool. Like, I'm really good friends with, Kaplan and Watcher and Celestalon and those guys. We still hang out. But they, people didn't understand why I was going. They thought, oh, Riot's just throwing a ton of money at you, or it was tough. It was tough. It was a hard decision. Even though I said I wanted to be a part of it, I agonized over it. I took literally long walks on the beach, like, what's my future going to be here? Curtain 1 or curtain 2.
Yeah. One of the things that is interesting is I feel like with the previous stuff you've worked on, like, wow, you have these really big moments, like an expansion that hits and you can change everything all at once. Here you are pushing out so many updates, and stuff like that does happen, where you suddenly all the marksmen are rioting because they feel like their role isn't available, and Peter's going out there, Devil's going out there and saying stuff, and other people are saying, that must be, that is there a chance where that feels just like a lot, like you almost kind of wish that you had moments of more downtime, more calm for you to think longer on these things?
Oh yeah, it would be awesome if our patch notes were like one bullet every time, because then we could test that change and feel really good about it. But there's so many things that need to be improved in the game. There's so many bugs, there's so many old champions, and this is not unique to League of Legends, it's just software development where there's always things you want to make better. And so we feel like we're doing players a disservice if we sit on things for too long. For every oh my God, these last 3 patches were so crazy, there's players saying, hey, Mordekaiser's been bugged for like 10, 12, 40 patches. Why don't you guys get around to this?
Has there been a time at Riot where you felt like a sense of defeat or frustration, or like a big messed up where it just sat with you for a while?
I mean, every day we do a little of that. I think the worst that I can remember recently was the dynamic queue, where we thought we were doing something really awesome for the game. We heard the feedback, but we thought, okay, they're going to say this, but then once they see it, they're going to like it. And we just really lost the trust of a lot of players through that.
There was, at the time, I think you guys touted numbers that were trying to show that like this was a better system in some ways, right? And I feel like Riot, I know, looks at all data frequently and uses that to inform, but then you have situations where you're looking at Reddit, which is a small and hardcore section of your population, or equal, similar communities like that in other regions. And how do you balance those moments where like the data is telling you this is great, but other these player bases are rioting and being frustrated,
I mean, we're in this for the long term, and one of the, I don't want to make it sound like trust is a currency that you accrue and spend, but one of the things that's allowed us to keep making the game is that players trust that if we screw something up, which we do all the time, that we'll fix it. And they have faith. They don't give up. They don't say, well, I'm done with, some of them do, but generally they don't say I'm done with this game because I don't think Riot's ever going to get it right. And so when you blow trust too much, you run the risk that they're like, okay, I don't know if they're going to fix this. I don't know if they still care about me, if they're still listening. And I feel like that was an example. There's been others. That was a big one. We're currently in the middle of it right now with this whole per position MMR thing, where I feel like if we're not careful, we could be in a similar case where the data is on our side, but the perception is not. and player perception is still really important to us. You know, we care a lot about players feeling like we care about them.
Yeah. What motivates you to work long hours and grind down on these things and deal with community frustration and all that stuff? Like, what really gets you excited about this job?
I mean, you're touching the lives of a lot of people, and when we do something half-assed or we make a mistake and someone who is waiting all day to get home and play League of Legends like can't play, and usually they can play, but it's just a suboptimal experience, we've let them down. Like, this is really important to their lives. This is their, primary form of entertainment. Or sometimes I'll talk to players, particularly in shall we say, Asian countries, who will say, like, I don't play this because it's fun, I play it for the prestige. I play it because I feel like I can be someone when I climb the ladder. It's really important to them, and it's kind of not fair for us to take that away from them through, just being bad at our jobs or making dumb mistakes.
One of the interesting things I mentioned, or you mentioned, was that when you were working on WoW, WoW's like this ever-evolving game. You can be on it; it's never going to end.
Yeah.
League of Legends, very similar situation, right? For you, is there a situation where you're going to end up with fatigue there and try to figure out something else, or like how is there a difference here with League because it releases more often? Like how does the situation happen with WoW? How does that reflect what could happen with you in League?
WoW at the time when I started to feel that fatigue felt like it had was in its mature period. Like, it had gone through the period of like rapid evolution, and now we, meaning the dev team, kind of understood what the game was. And you could look out in the future and say, okay, I kind of know what expansion 10 is going to feel like. League to me still feels super wide open. I feel like even though the game's coming up on 10 years, that there's still so much we want to do. There's so many huge opportunities. There's still very few ways to experience the game. For a lot of players, it's solo ranked SR with probably like one or two champions. So there's a lot we can do. There's a lot of the game that is just kind of not up to 2018 standards. We have a lot of crazy ideas that we're just trying to figure out the right way to do. And so when I look out 5 or 10 years, I'm like, yeah, there's going to be crazy stuff that I can't even imagine now. And it's going to be really fun to look back on and say, remember when the game didn't even have this feature and now it's so important?
You probably get this question a lot, but do you have any advice for people who want to get into the games industry, work in game design, that kind of thing?
Yeah. The best advice I always give is you should try to make something. If you aren't a technical person and Unity scares you, make a board game or make a card game. If you don't enjoy figuring out the rules to a card game, you're not going to enjoy figuring out the rules to, a Skyrim or a Doom. Playing games and loving games is really different from designing games, because you have to think about the game in a lot, in really different ways. There was an example on the internet the other day of, imagine the interaction between the player and a merchant who's selling you a weapon in the game. Like, can you refund the item? Do different merchants sell things for different prices? Do different merchants have different inventories? Do the inventories change over time? Like, you have to answer all of these questions. That's really fun for some people. It's fun for nerds like me. Other players would be like, that's not the interesting part to me. I just want to make a cool weapon or something. Yeah. So it's a different skill set. You can't be a good game designer unless you really love games, but you can certainly love games and hate designing them.
So make things.
Make things. Make whatever you can. If you can't, make a mod for a game that you love. Get out the editor and make a level for a game that you love. I think that's the best advice. When I applied to Ensemble, I submitted like Dungeons and Dragons adventures I had written, because that was like the only way I could show that, like, look, I can follow something to completion. I can make the hard calls at the end to cut things that I love just because I want to get it done. I can play test things and react to the feedback. I can kind of have a series of goals and follow through the steps I need to meet those goals. At the end of the day, you're making a product, as gross as it is to talk about games in that really businessy standpoint. So you have to think about the entire package of, like, what does it look like when you finally ship something? How are you going to patch it? What are you even trying to realize by making this thing? So by making anything, it kind of helps you go through that process.
And then a final question here. Is there anything that League of Legends fans or people who are interested in sort of like the state of the game and the future of it and all that stuff, anything that you would say to any of those folks that maybe they don't know,
Yeah, I think from the outside, it can be really hard for players to fathom the machinery it takes to make a game this large. Like, I think sometimes they imagine 10 dudes sitting around a table arguing about whether to buff Aatrox or not. But the development team and Riot is a gigantic company. It takes a lot of moving pieces. You have the team that is just making sure the servers are up in Singapore at any given hour of the day. You have the teams that are making sure that when we localize something that it fits in Korean, because Korean characters end up being taller than characters in a lot of other languages. Understanding that the PC Bong business model is super different than the I buy RP and buy skins with that model. And so it's never that someone has a bad day playing a champion and comes in the next day and demands they be nerfed. It's it's a large company working on something. When you see a movie, at the end of the movie, you watch these credits and it scrolls through forever and ever and ever, and you're like, wow, it took 16 people to render Iron Man's armor? That's insane. Or look at all the people that were just buying food for everyone else working on the product. We don't make credits for League of Legends because it's not, it's not a game that has a beginning and end. There's no really opportunity to run the credits. So I think it's easy for people to forget just how many humans it takes to make this thing go, and how, even if someone like me had a dark vision for the game, how impossible it would be to make that happen with so many other people that kind of act as a sense of checks and balances on stupid ideas.
I do. The next time I interview you, I will ask what your dark vision for League of Legends would be if you had to have one. It would be good to find.
That'll be fun to think about.
Thank you so much, Greg, for sitting down with me today. It's super fascinating. I loved hearing sort of about your path and your insight into League.
Awesome. Anytime.